In many ways, I knew when I was younger, when people just saw me as a little bit weird and a little bit strange and, just a little bit like on a different pathway. Then at one point in time, I felt like a failure. And then I started to realise actually I wasn't a failure. It's just that, things hadn't gone the way that I'd planned. I'd really put value on things such as mobility and physicality, presence and status, independence and autonomy. And all these things have just been taken away. A case of, well, why are men not engaging in this? What are the barriers? What will motivate men into it? What will demotivate them to be less considered or concerned about these things? How do we notice what happens? For example, women are 3 times more likely to get interrupted in a meeting than a man is. And that's not just by men, that's by other women as well. We also look at their values, how they express themselves, and really focus on what man would you want to become? Who can you become? Rather than being told how to be.
Welcome to another episode of the Leading Boldly podcast. I'm Matt Clutterham.
And I'm Jenny Jarvis.
Today's guest is redefining what inclusive leadership really looks like. Lee Chambers is an award-winning business psychologist, author, speaker, and founder of Male Allies UK. Recognised by UN Women, Marie Claire, and the BBC, Lee is making allyship practical, well-being strategic, and inclusion something people feel, not just hear. He's worked with global brands like UBS, IKEA, and Oracle, spoken at events like One Young World and Change Now, and been honoured as a National Academy of Sciences Fellow and Menopause Champion. Lee is also proudly Black, autistic, and disabled, and he brings that lived experience into every room he enters. His perspective is fresh, real, and deeply human. From losing the ability to walk in his 20s, to rebuilding his life and launching multiple businesses, to stepping back from a tech CEO role to be a stay-at-home dad. Lee's story is one of resilience, courage, and bold reinvention. If you want to know how to get more men meaningfully engaged in inclusion, how to lead with both empathy and edge, and how to build cultures where everyone belongs in the conversation, this conversation is for you. Lee, welcome to the Leading Boldly podcast.
It's a pleasure to join you both.
Oh, we were both speaking at exactly the same time.
We were.
So that doesn't always happen. So the first thing we always do is go back to childhood. And what was childhood like? Because that, I think, informs a lot of what we do as we grow older, but also it can be a completely different road. So we can go, oh yeah, no, completely different. So what was childhood like for you, Lee?
So when I reflect back, I had a really interesting childhood. So I was born in 85, prime Thatcherite era. My parents were teenagers when I was born, so I was a bit of a surprise. And they really wanted me to be a great example to my younger brothers. They wanted me to get the professions that they'd thought about but not been able to pursue. And I grew up in Bolton in the northwest of England, which as a young black boy, there were very, very few of us in that northwestern mill town and in the surrounding areas as well. So it was very interesting. I faced a little bit of racism growing up, which definitely shaped my perspective on fairness. But as a very young child, I was some people would say quite gifted with signals and language, but also always really, really curious. I was that child who had a bit of a social justice pillar from a very young age, and I was renowned at playgroup for seeing a child having a toy stolen off them and me then going stealing it off the person who'd taken it and given it back. But tended to be the child who was spotted taking it from the other child and was kind of labelled as maybe a little bit of a troublemaker. And to this very day, I would say that professional troublemaker title has still followed me along on my journey in pretty much everything that I've done. But I would also reflect that my childhood it was very interesting, kind of being a little bit different. I always kind of felt that was a bit different. I went on a bit of a journey through education. I struggled at times, but also at times I really did well, especially when there was adults who were willing to support me and see that I had something to give. And something that really sticks with me in terms of the very work that I do today is when I was facing quite a bit of racism in the juniors of primary school, our head teacher, and this is in the 90s, decided to look at bringing some anti-racist strategy into our school so that my and my few Asian friends' lives would be better. And it made our educational experience much better. And she involved parents, other teachers, even the reverend across the road. And I now credit her with me being able to excel in education in the way that I did because she removed some of those barriers and made me feel like I belong there. And that really aligns to very much to the work that I do to this day.
That really it's given me goosebumps, but also it's an amazing story, but it's also sad because those things are still not happening now. And that was back in the 90s. And I have a really close friend whose daughter is experiencing terrible racism at school now. And you'd think we'd get past all of that. You would think we would be beyond that and in 2025. And it just, so hearing your story, it was uplifting, but also frustrating because we're like, it's happening in schools now. Why is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, Jenny, and what we face is it was very, very rare looking back now at the time for that to be done in an inner town school in a kind of a city in the northwest. Um, but it did, and I can find gratitude within that. But it also makes me realize the impact of it and makes me very passionate about how do we create better educational conditions so that all children, no matter what their identity, the demographic, the culture, and the background, get a chance to make a difference. Because was also, I grew up on an estate. I was also from a lower socioeconomic background. And at times, when I went through that whole educational journey, I was the first one in my extended family to university. At times, it was actually my class that put up more barriers than my race and ethnicity. And that's something we rarely talk about in the UK, and some people don't even like to talk about. But to kind of expand on that journey, I was the first one in my extended family to university. And as I tried to make that adult to adolescent transition, I really struggled. I really found it quite difficult. I couldn't see people out there in the world who were like me. When I reflected on my younger self, I was a bit of a scientist, bit of an entrepreneur, bit of a philosopher. But I looked out for representation of people who looked and sounded like me in society. I simply couldn't find them. And I
Mm.
did feel a bit lost at that point. And like many young men, didn't really have the tools to explore myself, the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, to unlock some of those doors within me to explore, understand, and express who I was. And that actually caused me to drop out of university halfway through and spend a year getting into a better place mentally.
Mm.
And I actually managed to get back and graduate. And at that point, I managed to get on a grad scheme at a national bank. And off I went with big dreams of building a career and having the profession that my parents had always wanted for me. They took me to Burton's to buy my first work suit. They were so proud. And then off I went at 22 into that corporate world. And funnily enough, that didn't last as long as many people were expecting it would.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to that, but one of the topics I wanted to dive into now, because I think it is relevant, is you're very open about being autistic. And I just wondered at what point was that evident? When did you get a diagnosis? Like, how did that all come about?
So obviously, there's so much I could say about this. So to give some clarity, I was 36 when I was diagnosed.
Yeah.
So it's quite a journey. And along with a lot of other people of color and a lot of women are finally getting a diagnosis in these times over the past 5 years that starts to explain an awful lot.
Mm.
Uh, and getting that diagnosis is both liberating and frightening at the same time. For me, as I said earlier, I've always kind of known that I'm slightly different in how I approach the world, how I think about things, my ability to join dots up that other people just can't really see the connections between, but then really struggle at things that people expect you to be really good at, things that I considered like basic skills. Where my kind of attention goes, my communication style, some of the sensory challenges that I have. Uh, in many ways, I knew when I was younger, when people just saw me as a little bit weird and a little bit strange and, just a little bit like on a different pathway than many other kids. And my incessant curiosity to ask why and to feel completely entitled to question adults and challenge them was seen, like I said, got me into some great conversations, got me into trouble as well. Um, but I hadn't actually came across the term autistic until I was at university. So it just wasn't spoken about in the 80s and 90s.
Nope.
And when it was really kind of polarized stereotypes like Rain Man on one side and being completely non-verbal and completely reliant on others on the other, and nothing in between. So even when I started to hear about it, it was difficult to recognize and identify with because of how it was framed, very often alongside being a severe learning disability or turning you into some kind of otherworldly genius. So it made it hard to attach to. And there's a community aspect as well around being a person of color, where there is considerations around neurodiversity potentially being another barrier to overcome because you're going to have to work harder than other people anyway. Why would you add another barrier in? There are some challenges in our communities around how disability is perceived as weakness or something that can be fixed. Where it sits within cultural and faith and religious contexts as well, where within our community sometimes it's seen as potentially being punished or not being the way that things should be, or even that you might be able to be cured through prayer or by going home and seeing the spiritual healers. So for me, I've got a very interesting relationship with it, having unpacked some elements of that. And if I'm honest, to this day, my mum still doesn't like talking about it. So it gives you some idea of some of the cultural nuances and additional barriers that come. But for me, I really kind of hit a passion point on my son's diagnosis journey, which was actually the seed for my own. And we really struggled to get the NHS to take us seriously. We had one doctor who kind of spent 10 minutes with him and then said, "Oh, wow, he's so articulate, you should put him on YouTube." He was like 5 at that point. Yeah. And we actually had to, at one point, to accelerate the process, get an educational psychologist to come and write a report to help the NHS take us seriously, which was money out of our own pocket. And we had the privilege to do that when many other families don't. But that very educational psychologist, after the parental interviews with me and my partner, kind of pulled me to the side and just said, "Lee, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?" And it just made me think that actually it was probably worthwhile me going on that journey, not just for my own kind of resolution and ability to consider or find some level of structure around the difference, but actually more to be part of my son's journey and to actually showcase to him and role model to him that it isn't something that necessarily needs to hold you back, but almost it's something you can take with you with a level of pride. Realize that it's part of who you are, it's not who you are, but more so because there are so few black males who are openly vocal about it. Interestingly, there are more black females who are open about their neurodivergence, but with so few black males and its alignment to being less than in the community around not being particularly valued from like a heteronormative perspective in terms of masculinity, I was passionate that I needed to show those young black boys who are out there who are that actually it's okay and you can achieve so many different things and the world will start to consider actually the power of difference rather than be fearful of it. So I thought I didn't see a role model. So maybe me and others could step into that place and actually show what was possible.
That's awesome. It really resonates with me as well because I got my diagnosis of ADHD at 46 because of my girl's diagnosis. And like you, I thought I could not get the diagnosis. It's not made a massive difference to my life having the diagnosis, but it just gives them something to look at and go, actually, I can do that. I do have similar struggles too. And I can talk to them about, well, I had those struggles when I was younger too. And these are my tools, but you need to find your tools. And they might be different to mine, but there are tools. And that's the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I also resonated a lot with your story. I don't have any sort of formal diagnosis. I didn't even really, as you said, which really resonated for me, I didn't even really know what autism was until I was in my 40s. Um, but I experienced many of the things that you're talking about at school. I was different. I thought differently. I could connect dots that other people couldn't, and I couldn't understand. I still struggle to understand why people can't see things the way I do sometimes. And but I can. And I don't like to use the word superpower, but I do. I now use those things to my advantage in my business and other things. So yeah, it's fascinating, and I really sort of felt myself in your story, particularly at school. So university then, what happened?
So I went off to Manchester. So I didn't want to stray too far from home. So I was only 25 miles away, which kind of for me was a relative level of safety net, but also I had to work like quite a lot to be able to fund. And I was, obviously coming from a lower socioeconomic background. When I went to sixth form, it was to get EMA. It was helpful to our wider family budget. And then going off to university, I actually spent the first year at home because I couldn't afford to board, even though I was working 20, 22 hours a week. But in the second year, I did manage to move in and was determined to try and expand on that university experience. But at the same time, obviously, not having anyone really within my kind of wider network who'd been on that journey to kind of ask, how do you get through it when it gets difficult? Secondly, kind of moving into uni halls and then having to fend for myself, my own kind of eating, sleeping, all these things that I had some kind of prompt or structure at home that I suddenly lost that structure and had to rebuild that. I found the first 6 months I actually did quite well with that, and I signed up to lots of clubs and societies to give me a structure. But I actually started to burn out, and that was the kind of the start of it where I chucked myself into everything. And suddenly found myself really starting to struggle and trying to navigate, starting to look after myself. And it was the self care that started to drop off. Alongside that, university started to get a little bit more challenging, and the pressure comes towards the end of that second year. And I started to feel more of that kind of pressure to succeed, the pressure to really be that great example that everyone in the community wanted me to be because I was the first one to make it. That pressure and privilege was a lot on my shoulders. Uh, and then thirdly, I went through that kind of period where I was 19. I was starting to think, I'll be finishing university in a few years. What does life hold for me? What does my career look like? What might I be able to do? If I'm honest, I was still struggling to define that. So when you struggle to define that, you start to think, well, who am I? And I found, like many young men, it was difficult to try and dig really deep into who I was and to understand that. And when you don't really have those tools, you naturally then look externally to think, are there examples of people like me doing things that I think I could do that would give me some ideas on the pathway that they took and the things that they'd done and any advice or guidance or clues that they'd left? And I just looked out and realized, how many kind of black men from the north are there out there in society who've grown up, from a lower socioeconomic background and now doing things out in society that are kind of like what I want to do. And obviously, this is before the days of social media. At this point, we're still talking in the mid early and mid 2000s when I was at university. So there was no social media. You were lucky to have friends reunited to see what people you went to school with were doing. But apart from the few people who were platformed, and the truth is, black men who were platformed, they're often athletes, musicians, actors, not really any business people, any scientists, any thought leaders. So I just looked and I couldn't find anyone like me. And I was like, I don't even know where I'm going. And it just caused me to really start to doubt my own ability, doubt what my future might hold. And all those things came together and I just started avoiding stuff. So what happened first is I started to avoid some of the groups and societies that I joined up for. Then I started to avoid some of my friends. And this is in the days before WhatsApp, where you could kind of get away with not communicating by text message for a few days and people didn't worry that much. Then I started avoiding going to my lectures. Then I started avoiding going for my shifts at the work, and I worked in the NHS to fund through that time. And then I actually kind of started to really worry and be fearful about going to my exams. And just this all accumulated in me locking myself away for 10 days in my dorm and security literally coming, extracting me and taking me on. So that was obviously a really kind of traumatic time in a lot of ways. But like in reflection in many things in our own lives, we realize that through that adversity, it actually is an indicator to something. And getting back to the safety of home, not having the pressure of university hanging over me, I actually managed to get some space to think, what has happened and what can I maybe do? And I spent a year at home getting into a better place, getting another job part time just to start to get me back into some kind of structure and socialization. And I found elements of personal development in that time that helped me to start to understand myself better. And after that year, I felt in a much better place. Still had some challenges mentally, but decided I was going to go back to university. And I went back, and over the next 18 months, kind of got my head down, got a bit clearer, took some of those lessons, and managed to graduate. And I think that was the first time I felt really deep adversity in my life. And at that time, I was 19, 20 years old. But now I reflect back, and it was a formative time because even though it was really difficult, and even though there was tears, there was frustration, there was actually moments of joy and moments of seeing what was possible and realizing that actually at one point in time I felt like a failure, and then I started to realize actually I wasn't a failure. It's just that things hadn't gone the way that I'd planned, and actually I could grow through it. And that was a really powerful lesson that I've taken with me through many of the other pitfalls that I've fallen into over the years and many of the other kind of bits of adversity and challenge that I've faced, because it just shows that things will happen in your life. It's not one kind of continuous line of success, and it's not this career ladder or very kind of direct consideration that we almost think, but our life's path is really, really squiggly, really, really up and down. But ultimately, every time we go off on a bit of a different pathway, we learn something new about ourselves. And yeah, I look back and actually realize it was a formative time for me because it allowed me to see beyond what I thought was possible and actually gave me some options and a bit of bravery to go exploring in different directions. And also showed that you can go through something that's quite traumatic and still find a level of triumph on the other side.
That's an awesome message, and actually almost identical to the conversation I had with my 19-year-old this morning when she called me at 6:30 this morning going, oh, it's terrible, life's terrible. And she's doing great at work and everything. But I said, look, being 18, 19 is a horrible time for a lot of people. Some people say, oh, best time of your life. And others are going, no, it was horrible. You don't know where you are. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you're going. And everything in front of you is like a blank page, isn't it? It's not mapped out. And if you like to have a map and like to know where you're going, it's really hard to have this blank page in front of you. I want to skip forward to, so you did your banking, and then you said that you didn't last very long there. So how did that end and what happened next?
Yeah, so I ended up graduating in '07 and getting that grad scheme right at the top of the economic cycle. So I kind of walk in, 16 of us on the scheme. We kind of meet all the people on the team. They're talking about bonuses. They're talking about, how great things have been for years. House prices have inflated massively. Businesses are investing everywhere. And then about 6 months in, obviously, the credit crunch happened.
Kaboom.
And interestingly, many of those people who were very, very positive and very, very, bigging us up, were packing their desks up and leaving. And we were a bit like, oh, this doesn't really bode well. And it was only a year into our scheme that they actually pulled it, realizing that there just wasn't going to be the learning opportunities, the capacity, and the space for us in the current landscape. And again, like I said, my parents were so proud, the profession, the pathway, kind of a rigid matrix of development and professional education funded by them. That was pulled, then our roles were pulled, and all of a sudden I'm back home, and my parents have sold up thinking I wasn't coming back. So I'm in the boiler room at the back of the house. And because of the odd shape of the boiler cupboard, you can't put a single bed frame in there. So I had a mattress on the floor, a clothes rail, and I mean, I was happy in some ways, in a strange way, mainly because some of the senior people that I worked with, they had cars and houses and holidays and families and things they had to pay. And they couldn't get jobs because there was no jobs for them with their skill set because, everyone they knew had also been made redundant as well. So I was actually grateful that I was just at the start of my career. It did take me a few days to get there. I was absolutely gutted at first. But after those few days reflection and realizing actually I could have a bit of a blank slate, I think the power for me was realizing, well, I'm starting with nothing. I'm sleeping on a mattress on the floor. My parents didn't really want me back anyway. But actually, what am I going to do? And firstly, when you again come from the background that I do, you get out there and you go and get a job doing something because you have to. You have to fund your way. You have to support other people around you. So I went and got a job in local government. I thought, this will just give me the space to just think about what I want to do next. But the truth is, I went into systems and strategic change in local government, full of ideas as a junior employee who's thinking we can digitally transform this. Why we got all these stacks of papers? Let's get things, into the technological age. Why are we still doing this process like we did in 1965? Only to kind of realize that the directors of service were kind of looking at you thinking, yeah, and you are very young and I've been doing this job for 30 years and you just come in here with your bright ideas. Who do you think you are? Joyous. But it was at that point, about 6 months in, where I very quickly realized, I can do this job quite easily. If I accept that I'm not going to be able to create this revolutionary change that I want. And with austerity looming, it was actually more about using my skills to create efficiency rather than, and that got more traction. But at the same time, I also thought this salary, in comparison to the savings that I'm going to make, is it's not really making me very happy. And how am I going to have independence based on this? So that's when I started to toy around with different business ideas. And that's when I kind of hit upon, after a bit of a failed venture with trying to get into toys, which is such a difficult market to get into. I hit e-commerce business focused on video games, and it just took off. It just went. And the reason was because I just hit a point of digital adoption. And people were willing to get a new release posted through the door rather than queue up outside the shop. It was a point where people started to buy stuff online and trust that it would be delivered. And there was price competition there in a way that there wasn't before. And I just quickly realized if I thought from a logistical perspective how I can do this in a way that makes a small profit margin on everything that we sell, that will gradually add up over time. We'll be able to reinvest in more stock and just keep building it from there. And that's what we did. But it literally started out of that bedroom under that clothes rack. and it then started to take over my parents' house. And I remember the first Christmas, I literally had my parents and my two younger brothers working a production line on the ground floor and the first floor of our house. So it was a full-on family effort to start. What's fascinating is after 18 months realizing that this just isn't sustainable, doing this from a detached property. But one of the things that I really reflect on is really comical is as that continued to grow, I was able to actually buy my first property, which was a massive, massive kind of deal given where I'd been 2 years before financially. But secondly, I had to buy my parents a new driveway because of the amount of incoming and outgoing deliveries and vans rolling up on the drive. It actually partially destroyed it, is the best way to put it. So I also had to put a bit of my kind of bit of my savings aside to kind of repay my parents by putting the driveway back together again. But that gives you an idea of kind of what happened in that period. But it was really interesting because I went from, being in my overdraft and scraping by to suddenly having a growing business, responsibility, then my team's livelihoods, stressful, suddenly having money in a way that I never had before, and the success that I wasn't expecting, and a continuous feeling that it might all just collapse like a deck of cards at some point. And in a very quick moving industry where things are continually evolving, where competitors are very competitive, we continue to just keep on our toes and keep adapting. But that puts you under a lot of pressure, and you're not necessarily prepared mentally for the relative success that you're having. And I think, I reflect, and that was a real difficulty in those first 5 years. And to give some context, of the first 3 years of that business, 2.5 of those years, I was still employed in a full-time role. Now, I'll be honest, the first 2 years I was still employed at the council. One, because of that mindset of what if it all goes wrong? Secondly, if I'm honest, because I could do that job and still had an awful lot of time to run the business. I can say this now, like 16 years on, but I could do my job in 2 to 3 hours and then spend the rest of the time on my business. Which in itself is maybe morally not the best thing to do, but they wanted the outcomes and outputs and measured me on that, and I met them. So we now hear of people. There was someone recently who he had 4 different council jobs he was doing at the same time, and he's been in the news this week because they didn't think it was morally right. But he was hitting all his KPIs. It says quite a lot about the what people are there to do, but fundamentally, that business just continued to grow for 5 years, and it was a very, very exciting time, a very, very challenging time. And it very, very quickly showed as a young leader with not a lot of life experience, just how many gaps that I had.
Yeah, it's a brilliant story. And it's I think it's quite a traditional entrepreneur story of in being in a tiny back room, starting this business, it kind of blowing up and then having to repair your driveway, maybe your mum's driveway, maybe not the same. But, it's a really classic, like you were born to be an entrepreneur. So what? Oh, okay.
See, if I'm honest, I remember at the time, because at this point we are talking 2007, 2008. 2008 especially is when I kind of got this in my mind. But we were still in a time then of people doing well at school, going to university, getting a good degree, getting a career. The idea of stepping out of that was seen as foolish, especially if you didn't have the rich uncle or the father in business or your dad's mates all running companies. I got some interesting perspectives given when I suggested what I was going to do, because it still felt back then like it was something that was reserved for the few. And as well, the expectation of what people saw as a businessman, especially, 15, 16, 17 years ago, was not a young black lad with a northern accent. So it was quite interesting, some of the perceptions. And, I got quite a bit of pushback from people at times too. I mean, would I say I was born to be an entrepreneur? Possibly, because I'm not very conformist in my own nature. What I've also found is, given the skill set that I have, but the challenges that I have, it was always going to be easier for me to build something and bring people around me who were really good at the things I'm terrible at to support me and give me more space to do the things that I'm really good at. I was probably never going to get that working a corporate job. But even to this day, like, my perspective is, some people say, oh, everyone should be an entrepreneur. I don't believe that personally.
Oh, no, not at all.
No, it is a very interesting lifestyle choice. It's nowhere near as glamorous as people make out. It's more glamorized nowadays than it was 15 years ago, but it's still incredibly tough. Really kind of pushes you, requires you to deal with a lot of uncertainty, to really do work on yourself, but also to, be open and honest to your challenges. You have to be really transparent about what you're actually going through, and you need to be really humble, but also really driven. And that's a set of traits that you don't always find in people. But I say the skills of entrepreneurship, everyone should look to try and build those skills, because they're really valuable, not just in business, but in almost everything that you do. But being an entrepreneur itself it's risky. I didn't have a safety net. That was the biggest thing for me. Like, I couldn't really fail. And it was really interesting, because someone said to me quite early on that journey, you're actually someone to watch because you're dangerous. And when I say you're dangerous, what I mean is you've got no safety net. But people will underestimate you. And the reality is, with no safety net, you don't have anything to lose. So you are, like, dangerous, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, is what they said. So
It
yeah.
also means you'll do whatever it takes to make it work because you've got no choice.
Yeah, it cuts off all other options.
Yeah.
And if we think about what happens when humans make a decision that we're going to do something, I mean, the word decision is quite powerful, because it comes from, like, the Latin insere, which means to cut, like incision, scissors. And
I
that
didn't
means
know
to
that.
cut off all other options. So literally, when you're in my position, I made a decision and everything else got cut off. I had to make it work.
Yeah.
And therefore, that can really drive. I mean, the truth is, that can drive you to really dangerous territory, because sometimes you have to let things fail, and sometimes you have to step out and quit things, even when you've sunk an awful lot into them. But it does make you really tenacious, really kind of hungry, and really kind of driven to make sure that you extract everything that you can. But that does come at a cost, on reflection as well, for me, where I became slightly absorbed in proving other people wrong, because I'd had those doubts.
Yeah.
And that meant that I became a bit tunnel visioned and less likely to seek the support that I needed and the mentorship that would have benefited me, especially in those earlier days, because of my own perspective of myself and my own desire to prove people wrong, which is fuel, but it's pretty negatively laced fuel that reduces your ability to bring other people in to support you and to help your development, because you are the one who's trying to prove people wrong. It's a very individualistic way of working, which I reflect back and realize was definitely a weakness in my own style and, how I perceive myself, and was something that has taken years to work on and expand upon.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I absolutely we need to set aside plenty of time to talk about male allyship, because that's a huge, big deal. There's so many topics. I'm looking at my list going, oh my goodness, we've got so many things to talk about still. So where would you like to go next? Should we go on to male allyship, or is there something that comes before that?
So I think if we can talk about the C's that have taken me into this work, because at that point, people think he's building an e-commerce and software business, and now he's doing stuff around men and inclusion and boys in schools. That's a massive gap. So I suppose to give clarity on that gap, I can talk about that. 5 years of growth. We expanded out into Europe. It was a blur of a time. But the seed of this work started 11 years ago, when all of a sudden one weekend I became ill. My immune system failed, and I pretty much found myself in a hospital bed, partially paralyzed. And nothing really makes you stop like not being able to move. And all of a sudden, I was 29. I was in this place where there was so many things going on, and I was just stuck in a hospital bed and not even able to get out of it myself. And yeah, it just hit me. So at first, I was very much like, why me? Why now? It's not fair. But I very quickly realized as a support network started to spring up around me. I had nurses washing me in the shower, healthcare assistants helping me eat. It makes you realize what's important. And I started to realize what I'd not been grateful for. And I also started to think, even as a man, I'd really put value on things such as mobility and physicality, presence and status, independence and autonomy. And all these things had just been taken away pretty much overnight. And who was I when all these things were starting to strip away? It started to again make me do that self-exploration about who I was. And I started to think, would I be happy with the legacy that I created in those 29 years if, this gets worse and I don't recover? And kind of made me realize, well, no, I don't think I am. So after a month in hospital, I end up in walking rehab and have to learn to walk again. And that's really quite challenging in many ways, physically and mentally. But I had a bonus, I had a benefit. I had my son who was 2 and my daughter who had just been born when I was in walking rehab. So I had a vision, I had a reason. I was determined to get back on my feet so I could take my daughter's first steps. And that's what I wanted to do. That was a connection to something bigger than myself. It was a promise that I'd made, a goal, a vision. Even the image of me picturing myself doing it helped me on that rehab journey through some setbacks. And I was absolutely determined that I would make that my reality. And after 11 months, I'm back up on my feet. I walked a mile without any walking aids, and I knew I was going to be able to take those steps with her. And I did. And I took those first steps with her. And it's the most proud moment of my life. And, in my introduction, you kind of reeled off, so he's achieved this, he's been recognized here. Nothing gets anywhere near the feeling of being able to take those steps with my daughter and know that I could play with them in the garden and just do something that I'd have taken for granted had I not been on that journey. But it is quite funny because, as we were talking before this about children and all the joys, she's now 10 and I've not beat her much else since. So I take that beating her to walking as a bit of a victory. Because she is a bit of a whirlwind.
Yep.
And yes, I can always have a little laugh with her that, well, at least I won at that, as she smashes me around the court playing pickleball, or gives me a good kicking when we're playing football. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. But ultimately, that changed me again. I evolved. It made me think very differently about life and really go back to basics. And then I had a decision. I kind of got into a really good place with recovery. Medication was controlling my immune system. And there was an expectation that I was going to go back and step back into the company. I brought someone in to lead on an interim basis for a year. And I had a choice. There was an expectation that I would go back and lead on our North American expansion. And, you know, the leader would be back and he would waltz in and it would be great. And I just sat there one weekend and thought, I don't want to. I kind of realised that North American expansion would mean lots of working evenings and afternoons. Yeah, I might get those mornings potentially, but there'd always be European stuff that'd be taking that up. So I'd be working all the time. I just didn't want that. I wanted to spend some time with my kids. So I decided and jumped on and told everyone, not coming back operationally. I'm going to take a seat strategically and continue to guide where I could, but I'm not getting involved. I'm staying out of the way. I'm going to become a stay-at-home dad. And I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. Oh boy. So again, this was another thing that built into the very work that I do to this day, because firstly I thought, you know what, I've led a team of 100 people. 2 little humans will be absolutely fine. As it turns out, it's much easier to lead teams of adults to our shared goals who all have employment contracts and have a reason to be there and really clear targets and metrics to hit and a predefined culture that generally works around respect and dignity. And then you've got 2 toddlers who don't listen to what you say, won't be negotiated with, run off in 2 different directions when you've only got 1 pair of legs, and generally find that they want to do the exact opposite of what you expect. And they just do things that you just find it really hard to find the balance between, okay, do that and understand how risks work, but don't end up in A&E again, please, and get your hands out of the toilet. So it was the most effective leadership and development training course I've ever been on. And in addition, I thought, you know what? I'm a leader. I've got so many things all in my head, all these lists, all these actions. I'll be absolutely fine. Every time I left the house, I forgot something. The mental load was so significant. On some days at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was on my knees. It was incredibly demanding. And anyone who ever says, oh, what, you off on a holiday? It's like, no, it's not a holiday. It's definitely not a holiday. But finally, to that, it put me in a position where I was like, I need some respite. I'm going to go to my local baby and toddler group. So off I trot, thinking, yeah, this is good. They'll go and play. I'll just be able to breathe and have a brew. Oh, excellent. So I walk in. I look to my left. I look to my right. Then it dawns on me, I'm the only man in the room. And it was just such a, whoa, okay. And I just felt that discomfort. And I probably might have considered walking out. But as anyone knows, once 2 toddlers have ran into a room, again, in 2 different directions, started picking stuff up, you will not get out of that room without causing absolute carnage. So I just sat down and I just started to listen to the mothers and grandmothers in that room and realised that every single one had a story. Stories of being underestimated, stories of being managed out, stories of being discriminated against, stories of being harassed, stories of feeling unsafe, stories of being, treated like they were a second-class citizen. And it just made me think, I've got great women in my team, but I've never sat and listened to what it's actually like. And I then started to think, well, I'm not particularly happy about this. That kind of social justice pillar within me started to bubble again. Like, this is not fair. And I don't like things that are not fair or don't make sense. And I started to think, what can I do about it? And comically, at the same time, I was doing my master's in the psychology of interactions part-time in the evenings at that same time. And suddenly I was doing a unit around gendered interactions and our interactions with the built environment and how environments are very male normative in design and how workplace structures and communication tools are as well. And I was just like, all this stuff was coming and I was like, wow, okay, I need to do something, but I'm humble enough to realize I don't know what to do. And in addition, I can see it and I can't unsee it now. And I'm noticing more inequality in other places. And it's just making me uncomfortable and rather unhappy. So I thought I need to do some research to get into a more wise place around what I can do. And I need to do some work on myself to really think, what skills do I need to make a difference? And what blind spots have I got? So did a bit of a project, spoke to 50 men and women to try and understand what their lived realities were like at work. Just went on that journey. And that has been the journey, since that point where I kind of started that journey 8 years ago, has continued as a theme to try and think, how can we make workplaces more gender balanced, more fair, where merit does shine through, where people can reach the potential, where people can bring their best self to work and find a place to belong within that, and places where people can perform, where we think about those barriers that stop people performing and really bring them together. And that kind of passion started, and I thought, I'm going to keep working on this, working on this, working on this. And then when my daughter started school in September 19, I thought, right, I need to formalize this into something. So it started with the wellbeing research company Essentialize, as I was really fascinated about how the workplace could be a vehicle to close gender gaps, and especially around health. How could we get organizations to think about the impacts of menstruation, menopause, mental health, fertility, conversations that are not being had, but that need to be had not just by women, but by men as well. And that started to lead me over time through the pandemic into questions around men and not really engaging in these conversations. We look at people initiatives that are on the side of organizations, whether it's well-being, inclusion, engagement, employee experience. There's just so few men in those spaces being part of the design, part of the creation, part of the conversation. So that has led me over the past 3 years to really think about, okay, there's a really powerful building of skills that we get from being in those spaces that are actually more valuable as technical skills change. But these people skills actually become rarer as people chase the technical skills that are continually changing and evolving. And for me, it was really a case of, well, why are men not engaging in this? What are the barriers? What will motivate men into it? What will demotivate them to be less considered or concerned about these things? Where does gender bias in society play a role within that? Where are gender stereotypes upholding differences that are not helpful? And more to the case, how does this benefit men when they do build these skills? So
what answers have you got for any of this, Lee? Like, do you have some solutions?
I mean, much of our work is around those solutions. Now, in itself, it would take a whole episode to expand out. But fundamentally, allyship is a skill set, the skill set of working across difference, the skill set of being able to actively change systems to benefit how people can work together and how we can create better ecosystems in what we do. Now, for men, that's really beneficial. The skill set is beneficial, and the impact on men it has of learning that skill set is really beneficial. I found benefits from going on that journey, but I didn't know what those benefits were when I started. I was more concerned about the difference I could make for others out of a feeling of social justice and unfairness. I didn't realize it would fundamentally change me and provide me with skills that have been really useful in understanding myself, in leading others, in connecting with others. And, I can share the 37 different benefits that we've had from men who've spoken about what it's done for them. Everything from making them less fearful of making mistakes, less scared of getting things wrong, less feeling like they have to win all the time, less feeling like they always have to have the right answer, but also then feeling more approachable, seeing more nuance, having more self-awareness of the language that they use and how people interact with them, seeing how it creates space for risk to be mitigated earlier, but also space for opportunities to be noticed earlier as well. They've seen themselves enjoying and getting fulfillment out of seeing other people thrive because they've created those conditions. And they've seen people's potential come into light in ways that they've never noticed before. They find themselves more able to challenge and, push back against things that they don't believe in, which then aligns more to their values and makes them feel like they are kind of more present in being them. So there are so many different benefits. And then there are the more business orientated ones that men have seen in terms of making their, businesses and functions more effective around seeing how they can positively use behavior to change the direction that things are going in. And I suppose wherever those benefits are for them in terms of their personal interactions that then impact their relationships with their partners and children and family, or in the business sense around their teams and people, peers, leaders, people who they manage. But it's just being able to actually realize that building a skill takes time. It also requires a level of patience and humility, but it does require you to get uncomfortable because learning anything new is a challenge. And the biggest barrier to men stepping in is fear. And that fear is multifaceted. We've seen that in our research. Fear of overstepping the mark and upsetting people, fear of looking like a hero or a savior when they don't want to be seen as ego-driven, fear of not knowing what to do practically, and then looking like they're incompetent, incapable, fear of getting reputationally damaged in a very kind of quick to react, maybe not so tolerant environments that some people are in, and the fear of being judged by other men as being woke, politically correct, changed, soft in your old age. And all those fears play in potentially stopping people from taking more steps on that journey. But ultimately, the motivators are there. We see the motivators. The motivators are different. And telling people it's the right thing to do, it's a lot of people who, if we be honest, have really positive, virtue-driven value sets. The behaviours don't always match those values all the time. But we can all say that. Because truth be told, it might be the right thing to do. But what we found is that if you can find a cause, something that you see yourself growing into, it helps you sustain that action when it does get uncomfortable, when you do have to step up and challenge, when you do have to potentially call things out, or when you do realize that actually you've got some work to do yourself in unpacking some of this conditioning that we all have, because we've all swam in these seas of a society that are fundamentally not particularly equitable, quite biased, and not particularly fair and meritable either.
I mean, I think EDI is got a little bit of a negative connotation at the moment. Some people are really stepping back for it. I mean, there are certain countries that are removing all their EDI policies. How would you approach that? What's your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I've obviously taken a number of years observing, researching, and piloting. I can be quite transparent about how I currently feel about things. So, there was a lot of activity that happened in the pandemic around the murder of George Floyd, and that has driven race, but also other identities to become. There's a lot more activity in businesses. They felt that they needed to do something. The businesses that took the time to go to their teams, to go to their people, to think about what the business needed to do, to get that feedback, to create some interventions targeted and tied to some specific organizational outcomes. They took the time to think about building the foundations before they started doing stuff. I've actually found this work to be beneficial because it had a pathway built and it had foundations, and as they started to build on those foundations, they've seen the power of creating a wider space to attract talent, to retain talent, and to really get difference becoming something that's celebrated and embraced more than it's feared. The challenge is that some organizations were very, very quick to just do stuff, not put those foundations in place, and they didn't have those foundations before 2020. And the challenge is they literally built a house on sand. They built it so quickly with no foundations. And it's very easy to just blow that house over when it's not as easy to do as it was, and it's not as much in the public perspective as it was. And I think we can safely say, from a human perspective, that if you bash people round the back of the head, telling them they've done wrong and you've been biased and you've discriminated against people and you need to change, that actually shaming and blaming people doesn't create systemic or behavioural change for people. It just gradually makes them feel resistant, guilty, shameful, and that might elicit some change in the short term, but it doesn't create, any change or transformation in the longer term of people. And some work has been done, really positive interventions and initiatives that are now growing and scaling, even in the backlash and the wins, because they've been built in a structured way. They've showcased the difference they've made, and the business and all the people within it have benefited from those. Whereas some organizations did a lot of activities, a lot of parties and awards and food and lots of symbolic stuff that never really changed the lived experience of people in the organization. And even people in those identity groups got sick of seeing the business saying, we're doing this and we're doing that. And it's a really nice marketing campaign. And it's really nice getting all the visuals afterwards. And they've got, these lovely trophystore.com awards scattered all over their office. But the people walking around saying the culture's not changed. It's still exactly the same. And that makes people resistant on both sides. So the current state of EDI is good, well-structured, evidence-based EDI continues to actually do well. The businesses that have really applied it well continue to benefit. Those who have suddenly changed their minds in 6 months, they never built something meaningful in the first place. And it needs to be embedded into an organization. It can't just sit as this little plugin on the side. It needs to relate to organizational outcomes, to strategic pillars, to commercial realities. Because then it's business as usual. It's what we do. And we're trying to create that culture where our teams can thrive, where we can get better products and services for our clients and customers. And we can continue to evolve and have talent here that comes up with all sorts of great ideas and initiatives that, while not always the solution, might actually give us a different perspective that's really powerful. So I'm very clear. Where it's been done well and it's effective and it's measured, it's much easier to sustain that. You wouldn't keep paying money for a marketing campaign that wasn't getting you any new customers. And I think we need to be honest about that and appreciate that EDI, DEI, IDE, no matter what way you put it round, people have been employed in those positions in businesses sometimes because they've got really powerful skill sets to do that. And they more often than not have been able to be effective in those roles. But there's also been some people who've been parachuted into those new roles and not really given the support that they need, or enough of those change and transformation, behavioral change, stakeholder management, data literacy, business acumen that you need. It's a really wide skill set to be a practitioner in that space. And they've really struggled to make a difference. And then it's easy to then deposition them and say it's not worked. And external practitioners in the same way. There are no professional regulations or qualifications that directly mean that you can practice in this space. So again, there are some amazing practitioners who've been doing this for 20, 30 years, who in some ways have maybe even got overlooked in this new wave of kind of social media influencer type work. There are a few people who stepped in maybe without the intentions of making true and systemic change. But interestingly, when the wind blows back, those people tend to step away and do something else. So it's a time for us to come together collectively to ensure that practice is effective, that businesses are doing it well, and that there are no unintended consequences that exclude other people because it's been done poorly. And that is where we're at. Some of the things that have been done have not been particularly inclusive, even when they tried to be, because we shouldn't be preaching inclusion as one way of doing things, if this is what you should believe, because that's telling everyone to believe the same thing. That's not inclusive. We do have laws, we do have, ways that we should work together in employment. We have respect and we have dignity. But for years, people who are very different have worked together really effectively to make change and to, have businesses that are really good. We need to preserve that difference, but also find space to get a clear vision of what inclusion means here, where we are, and realize that inclusion is actually very, very different than diversity. And inclusion is something we can all do because we all have a level of agency over our own behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as you were talking there, I was sort of running through my own mind. We see so many of the same things, largely because they all relate to humans and the way humans behave and interact. But we see so many of the same things through our work in brand, in culture, in all those things where humans are the center of the ecosystem. And we've experienced the similar things to you've been talking about with our work with the charity Tough to Talk, who are all around men's mental health, and also we've done a fair bit of work with the NHS on marginalised groups accessing important support services. And it's we're absolutely seeing on the ground through our work everything that you're talking about, as well as that really important message that if you don't build the foundations, it falls over quickly. And the businesses and companies that dig the deep foundations see the skyscraper results because they can build those skyscrapers.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we talk about a lot in our work is you have to dig deep and build the foundations. If you build your skyscraper on sand, it's going to blow over and it's not going to be very pretty. And it happens all the time in brand, in culture. People think they can just create a nice logo and that's their brand. And they don't look at the whole, like, brand is your DEI policy. What does it say about you? What does it mean? What does it mean to you? How do you implement it?
Yeah.
That's all brand as well. I was gonna ask you if you had any questions, Matt, about male allyship and
Yeah, I'd love a really sort of potted uh description for me to understand like what exactly it is. And also uh we've talked a lot about the benefits for people and things, and I know that through your work you've proven with the successful companies that have done the work, the deep work, that there are real tangible benefits for the business as well as the people. And I'd love to know some of those uh, things as well. But yeah, just give me a sort of basic rundown of what it means to be a male ally.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because the challenges around the very term that our business is kind of framed as. Allyship itself, we define as the ability to work effectively across difference. So that is the kind of the core aspect of what it is. In terms of where the word comes from, we were fascinated about where did the word start? What's its origin? What's its root? Its root is the old French word allier, which means to combine, to unite, and to come together. So it is about how do we co-design, collaborate, but actually create cultures where that's possible and what's our role within that.
Mm.
And I especially focus on men, having noticed that men were not in those people spaces being part of creating those kind of strategies those systems and those cultures for the future. What does it look like? Well, I think there's so many different ways to be an ally. I think we talk a lot about practically what it looks like in terms of how do we challenge, how do we call things out, how do we notice what happens. For example, women are 3 times more likely to get interrupted in a meeting than a man is. And that's not just by men, that's by other women as well. So a perfect example is if someone gets interrupted, bring them back in. Bring them back into the conversation. What can a business do to become more strategic with that? We can create a no interruptions rule for meetings. So then anyone can enforce those rules. So it's
very difficult when you've got ADHD. I just interrupted you.
Exactly. But I think that then creates a transparency that does consider potentially people's needs, but gives them a structure within it, but also gives us a chance to think about people's potential accommodations for the rules that exist.
Yeah.
So there is that extra added mindfulness there. And to think about benefits to businesses, it's been really interesting working with businesses on this over the past few years, because so many businesses come to us with challenges around retention and attraction, challenges with, men who are just not particularly happy with how inclusion's been delivered to them previously. We have clients that have very, very different profiles of people working for them. For example, a retail client will have customer facing, will have warehouse and depot, logistics out on the road, back office functions, operational functions that require physical spaces. And inclusion means different things in different spaces. But it's often written by back office functions and then filtered out without any consideration for the different demographics and types of work that will interact with. And then you get people in the depot saying, it's a lot of rubbish, this stuff. Prices have just gone up. No one's consulted us. People don't realise that we keep the country running. No one seems to appreciate that. We never get listened to. My supervisor says it's nonsense anyway. And, I'm barely on living wage. Like, I've got other challenges going on. So even getting those voices into spaces and realizing that we need to amplify those different perspectives so that there's organizations can start to think, what does inclusion mean to us? Because really, part of our work isn't just the skills of allyship for individuals. It's actually the realization that most organizations are incredibly deeply siloed, and departments need to be allies as well, not just people. And that's where you can create some really powerful change when there's more consideration around how we work together as a unit that ultimately is delivering usually something from a start to an end. So there is that element of perspective. But then we're also seeing organizations where we are getting women coming to us and saying, look, the culture's changed. That kind of old boys culture where, there's banter that goes way beyond where it should do. It's just not happening. Things are changing. Actually, I feel more assured at work. I feel I'm not going to get discriminated against. I feel more assured to go for that promotion. We're getting men coming to us and saying, you know what, like, I used to think this was a load of rubbish, but actually, I feel more comfortable in being able to voice concerns about health and safety that's impacting all of us. I feel that actually, I can challenge my manager in a way that I used to think was going to damage my career, but actually, he's willing to listen and thinks that I'm adding value. And it's just creating cultures where, then saying, we've got double the amount of female applicants that we previously had. We've been losing lots of women in management, and that's been impacting our gender pay gap and our progression pathway, because we've got a direct kind of soft quarter around trying to get more women into senior leadership because we know it's going to be beneficial. And this has meant that the new cohort coming in and better retention means that we're not spending as much of our time spinning those wheels, trying to shoehorn diversity, because we've created a culture where it's just coming. And they are scoring better on surveys. And what we're getting, gradually starting to see, is positive cultural change. And that never happens quickly. It happens over time. And that's why we say that allyship isn't about big grand gestures, about big sweeping statements. It's It's about those small, everyday, micro moments of being a bit more intentionally inclusive. And everyone in an organization can do that, no matter what position that you're in. And leaders will have more control over the strategic aspects around promotions, project allocation, how meetings are run, who gets networking opportunities, who's in the room when decisions are made. But everyone across the organization has an ability to work on some of those moments and use those small moments to build that skill that will benefit them in the future as well.
I do think that people get confused, thinking that inclusion almost means exclusion of men. And I think that's how it's sort of been for the last few years, and that's the narrative that we're going to have to start changing, is that inclusion does not mean exclusion. We have problems with the Tough to Talk charity because the first thing people always say every single time, well, why is it male suicide prevention charity? What about the women? And we say, well, there are women suicide charities. 75% of suicides are by men. So 75% of men are dying by suicide. So that's why it's male centric. But also, if you can help men to deal with the thoughts that are going on before suicide, so it's suicide prevention. So we work with them, and then the women's lives get easier at home because the men aren't coming home depressed and miserable or erratic or doing all the things that lead to suicidal behaviours. So for us, it's an inclusion for women because it means that we're helping men to not be unpleasant to be around with the women, because that often leads to abuse at home and all sorts of things that are detrimental for women. But it's a really interesting thing. The first thing people always say is, well, what about the women?
Yeah, it's a real challenge because in a lot of women's work, that question is flipped. And I mean, the reality is, over the past 50 years, society has become a lot more individualistic. And that's a purposeful social engineering because when people are really good at creating collectives, they can actually make quite a lot of change. If we're focused on individuals, we don't have the bonds. It's much easier to manipulate a group of individuals in a certain direction and to commodify them. And I'm fascinated. Community used to be the street that you lived on. All different ages, all different political beliefs, different religions and cultures. You had commonalities, the street that you're on, that location, that region. England, won a football competition like we did recently. Everyone's out having a street party in the front. Lots of different people, shared goal, shared commonality, lots of differences. That was community.
Something to rally around.
Yeah, and that shifted. Now community is online. And the truth is, online communities are not like communities on the street. Everyone in that community believes the same things. That confirmation bias enforces that even more. And because they are all the same, it's easy to sell stuff to them. Really easy. And also easy to manipulate them into a position of thinking. That's not community. That's commodification. It's very, very different. And ultimately, what does that mean for the world that we live in today? Well, it's true. You can have multiple things true at the same time, but we like to have one source of truth. That's another problem that we face in this individualistic, one-dimensional society. So when people say, well, what about the women? You can say, more men die by suicide. They'll come back and say, but more women attempt it and are just less successful because they use less violent methods. And the truth is, who benefits when Tough to Talk become more successful? The answer, not just the men who find a way to move beyond what was going to happen to them, find a way to express themselves, find a way to navigate through their challenging times. When someone dies by suicide, one person is lost. There's a massive ripple effect on every single person around them. That doesn't discriminate based on gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they're
That's
suddenly
a
not
really
on the site on a Monday morning, when they're suddenly not on the sofa on a Tuesday evening, when they're not
yeah.
on the in the club on Wednesday afternoon, the impact is massive. So getting into a point of ideologically poking at social initiatives making a difference because they didn't care about one thing, people forget about the systemic impact that it has. And that is where we are at as a society. What about this and what about that? The same people who aren't doing anything to make society better. Easy to challenge, much harder to act and go and do something. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
brilliant points. Absolutely brilliant points. I really want to get onto your book, Momentum, but I've just got one more question for you. I'm a business owner, and I don't really know anything about this stuff, but I've listened to you talking. It's really fired me up. I want to make change in my business. What should I do first?
So, what's the first thing you should do as a business owner? If I'm brutally honest, the place where you should start is go and have a conversation with a few of your people. Just go and have a conversation, not about KPIs and have you done that job and what's happening on the landscape over there. Go and ask them what is it like working here. Just go and ask them what it's like. Now, I wish I'd have done that when I had my tech business. I didn't do that anywhere near enough. And it just gets you to consider what's going on for people. Because people, funnily enough, are much more likely to talk if you give them permission to do so by asking them. And we lost some of that in this digital world, where we just don't have that same moment outside the meeting room asking, what's going on for you. We just lost some of those opportunities. So do that because it will allow you to just consider, where are people at? And you'll get so much from just doing that because people will give you a bit of an indication. And the truth is, this work, if you're a really small company, you control the culture as the person who's leading. You really do. But you will get to a point where you're too big to just have your door open all the time for everyone. And that's usually a time when you start to think about who is going to build that culture with you. And that's always a good point to start to thinking, how do I intentionally do that so it is inclusive? And our clients start at that scaling phase of like 50 to 200. And that's where some of our kind of S in the SME clients are, because they want to intentionally start building that culture and realize that they need that talent to grow. And actually, allyship for growth can be really powerful, both for individuals and for the different functions of your business as you continue to grow.
Yeah, amazing. And we're going to put in the show notes below links to how to come and work with you, how to connect with you for anyone that wants to do that. But tell us about Momentum.
Yeah, so a book that took 18 months to write, that I poured my heart and soul into, that I wrote for three different reasons. Firstly, because I've always struggled at writing. In fact, I was that kid who had to redo his English coursework 4 times because my teacher was worried I wouldn't get a C. And you know what? She was right. Just scraped a C. So it was proof to me, writing a book about reaching your potential, that I had to go and test my own potential trying to write it. And unpacking that has helped me vocalize, many of the things you've heard in this episode, because it's helped me to focus on what lessons I've learned. Because Momentum is a book about navigating uncertainty, flourishing through change, kind of using volatility as a way to grow, and more than ever, a book about when you're at that crossroads, how do you think about where to go next in terms of pathways? So it really is, in these very kind of challenging times, quite a powerful book. Will every single one of the 13 lessons resonate with you? I'm honest, probably not, because we're all bio-individual, we're all unique. But a few of those lessons, shared by not only how it impacted me, but by the 17 people who've also contributed how they navigated those lessons. You will see a scientific consideration for why, some personal perspectives from both men and women, and then how you can go and explore and action this yourself. So it's very practical in the way that's delivered. And there will be a Chinese version for anyone who does speak Mandarin coming out at the end of the year if you want to explore that. But until that point, it's available in English at all good bookstores, anywhere where you get your books from. And I'd love to, for you to take one of those lessons and really go and apply it and make a difference in your life, because those are the 13 lessons that I wish I'd have known or even listened to, because I probably wouldn't at the start of my career 20 years ago. And each one of those 13 lessons I've had to learn the hard way.
So I read a post of yours on LinkedIn today, and you have some challenges set aside for yourself over the next couple of months. One of them was to get 50 reviews of your book on Amazon. So everybody that goes out, they're going to all rush and go and buy that book after they've listened to this podcast. Please leave a review. What were your other challenges you've set yourself for the rest of the year?
So the other challenge was to do 5 corporate book events. So events where we bring the book into your business, you purchase a number of copies for your team, and then we bring it to life. And it's a real powerful kind of leadership development, emerging leaders, and even for kind of new flourishing talent. It's a great set of lessons for ways for them to become more innovative, to become more entrepreneurial, to really think about how they can bring value to your business while building themselves. And like I quite often say, as a Black author, Black History Month is a perfect time to bring someone like myself in. Real tangible stories. If you've listened to this episode and you thought, actually, he imparts a message quite well, he's a bit of a storyteller, but there's evidence behind what he says, I will bring those lessons to life for your team, and they will all leave with something to take away and go and apply, a book to read. We can even get books that are specially designed for your business. So we're looking to get 5 of them in before the end of the year. Bloomberg, Barclays, Lloyds Bank, I've already made that happen, already enjoyed those. So, are you the next company to make it happen?
Yeah, so if anybody knows of a company that fits that bill, send them in Lee's direction too. We'll put your what's the best way to contact you, Lee?
So the best ways would be either through LinkedIn at Lee Chambers, or through my website at leechambers.org.
We'll put the links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, as well as an Amazon link to the book and the review section. So please do go purchase one and leave a review. We're about to come on to my favourite bit of the podcast, but I have one quick personal question for you. We talked right at the beginning of this podcast. One of the first things we talked about was you running around your first school, being the saviour, the maverick hero, like stealing the toy back and giving it. And then it seemed a little bit like that Lee got lost until nature made you stop and refocus on actually who you were meant to be. Did you turn that part of you off? Was it a conscious thing that you turned off, or did that Lee just get lost for a little while in trying to sort of build a life?
So I think that in many ways I reflect back, and that adolescent period really mixes up who you are. All becomes a bit of a blur, and you kind of really become focused on who can you become. And in that, you almost lose who you are. You're projecting out into the future. You're thinking about possibilities, and at that point, when all your hormones are going all around, you actually kind of can get shifted away from your values and who you are. And some of the things that happen through trying to break through, be that example that my parents wanted me to be, then trying to be successful, then trying to prove people wrong, were things that pulled me away from my values. And the truth is, you don't see it because you gradually edge away a little bit. And it did take me getting seriously ill to put me back in alignment. And I think that's a lesson for all of us, because I'm absolutely sure that most people have found themselves drifting away from the values and not really noticing as they've gone in the pursuit of something that actually has been prescribed by external society, not by your internal compass. And for me, it was realizing that actually I'd been pulled away, and it took something quite extreme to pull me back. But that's why I look now and think I'm actually glad I got ill. It almost happened to me. It didn't,
Yeah.
like it almost happened for me, not to me.
Yeah.
So, like, I know that some people wait a lifetime for something like that to happen before they have that switch and realize that they're so far out of alignment.
I also think that there is an element of when you are that child that wants to rescue everybody because you see the sense of injustice and you are in trouble for that all the time, it then becomes a narrative of, oh, well, I better not do that because I'll get into trouble. Like, every time my daughter was suspended from school was when she was trying to stand up for someone else, when she stepped in for someone else, when she did things for someone else. And the one thing I never wanted her to not do was stand up for what she believed in was right and wrong. And unfortunately, we're in school systems where you're not allowed to do that. And I think that really prevents people like yourself and my daughter. Like when you told that story, I was like, oh, that's her all over the place. She was the child right from being 2 years old that would go up to the crying child and try and work out what she could do to fix it all. And she still does that. And that's, I think we emotionally beat that out of our kids when they go to school because that's seen as troublemaking. And actually, you started off a new question for there. Sorry, so your favorite bits got to wait a bit. What work are you doing with boys in school? Because I think we sent Tough to Talk into our local school to talk to boys about their mental health, and they loved it. They said it was one of the best talks they'd ever had. So what are you doing with the young boys? Because it's so important, they're lost.
Yes. So, as well as the research that we've been doing, so we've been asking them about their perceptions on education, on technology, on the future, on masculinity and femininity, to try and understand how do they perceive that boys in secondary education in the UK today. It's fascinating to see what topics have come from that. But the wider kind of work that we've been doing has been focused on critical thinking and digital literacy. So understanding how the online world works, how influencers work, how they, there's a reason behind the content that they're making. And it's kind of your point to think, what are they trying to get me to do? We kind of talk a little bit around that kind of misogynistic content that's there, and why that is challenging, but not in a way that kind of, because obviously some lads are like, everyone's talking about toxic masculinity, all boys are bad. It's like we approach it in a way that's looking at the systemic challenges instead of blaming them and helping them realize that they can actually be a part of the change. But we also look at their values, how they express themselves, and really focus on what man would you want to become? Who can you become? Rather than being told how to be. So our passion is helping them to get more defined in who they are and saying there isn't one way to be a man. It's over 4 billion ways to be a man. And the best part of the journey is finding the man that you can be over time, and realizing that there are lots of people who will tell you how you should be. But actually, you definitely need to spend some time listening to yourself and wondering who you are. And that will help you on the journey of becoming the man that you truly should be, rather than the one you're being told to be.
I love that you're giving that message. I mean, you had that realization only a few months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was brilliantly put. I can't improve on that at all. Like that was really powerful and a great message. And we for one are glad that the play school Lee is back because you're making an impact and what you're doing is so important. So thank you for coming back and doing what you're doing because it's amazing. So now I'm gonna wrap up with my Desert Island Discs moment, and I'm gonna ask you, Lee, for a book a piece of music and a tool or framework that has really been transformational for you that you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Ooh.
Little hint, you are allowed to use your own book.
No, you're not.
No.
No.
That's exactly what someone who was lacking creativity and very conformist would do.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, a book for me, it has to be Invisible Women by Caroline Corrado Perez. It's just so well written in terms of showcasing the data of why the world is so built for men
Hmm.
and not built with women in mind. And obviously, a lot of books that kind of look at that gendered piece are much more targeted towards a female audience because they're likely to be engaged. The thing about Invisible Women is it's full of data. It reads like it's being written for men. And we know there's a big content gap in what men consume. They don't like consuming things that are not typically designed with them in mind, whereas women are a lot more flexible within that. So that's a book, because just reading that just made me see even more things on that journey. Wow, a piece of music. That's a really good one.
While you're thinking of that, I'll just say that one of the things I've really enjoyed talking to you about is that you're not sort of sitting on a high stool sort of preaching. You're everything you're doing is based on research. You're on the ground talking to people, researching in the trenches with companies, working out how to do this stuff. So you've got the data, and I think that that's really great. But yes, back to the music.
Yeah, I have a really interesting like relationship with music because I listen to like a lot of instrumental things to help me focus. And then
Hmm.
if I'm like, because I reflect and my music changes really kind of shifted with the times in a lot of different ways. Um, do I have to even answer that question?
No.
No.
It's really interesting because most people are, oh, how do I choose one? It's like there's so many. So we quite often get genres or bands or
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
oh,
if there
but
is if there is,
instrumental works.
yeah, but if there is a song that I kind of reflect back on, uh, the Isley Brothers, "Harvest for the World."
Hmm.
It's just that kind of. I listened to it back now, like probably the best part of 40 years after it came out, and it's just still spot on to this day. Um, why have we created this world in the way that we have? And it's just very poignant
Mm.
still.
Hmm.
Um, and finally, a framework. Oh,
It's another
uh,
hard one, right? It's yeah.
So many.
I mean, I almost want to go quite comical here. So obviously, my initial kind of degree was in business and psychology, right? So I really enjoyed the juxtaposition between business frameworks and psychology frameworks.
Yeah.
And what always sticks with me is the first framework that we did in business was the good old Boston Matrix. Now, who doesn't love a Boston Matrix? And actually, with my best friend, who I met on that first day of uni, I was joking the other day that, Boston matrices are back in fashion. And a good pestle analysis.
Yeah, they are.
um, so I was kind of laughing. And the truth is, nowadays, there's very few things for any newish business that are truly a cash cow. Just the
Yeah.
world moves so quickly.
Yeah.
You can't just sit there on things like that anymore. So it is interesting how even frameworks that were once um, the the framework of the day have to be adapted and applied for the modern world.
Yeah.
But the fundamentals of things, the deep fundamentals of things never change.
No, absolutely. And interestingly, Lee, as we're talking to you, the biggest cash cow we see in our work for businesses right now is difference.
Hmm.
So it's not only people, it's business too.
Indeed.
So last the last podcast we recorded, they snuck in a new one for us, and I'm going to see if you've got one. Do you have a favorite phrase, motivational sentence that drives you?
Yeah, so I think I might have actually used it. So discomfort is where the growth is.
Yeah.
And that's really important. But I think the other thing that I quite often had to use to improve my ability to listen, because that's something I've actively worked on over the past 10 years, because I'm one of those people, what's going on in my head, not the best at actively listening, is that listen has the same letters in it that silent does.
Brilliant. Love it. Yeah, that's a new one. I've not heard that one before. Yeah, I love things around comfort zones and growth as well. One of my favorites is your comfort zone isn't actually comfortable. It's just familiar.
It's
that's a
it's a padded jail cell, Matt.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Padded jail cell.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as coach, I'm never in the comfort zone, rarely in the comfort zone.
Not if you can help it.
No, I know. I try.
Lee, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you today.
Yes.
We could go on for hours, but I'm afraid we can't. It's been really good. Thank you so much for your generosity, sharing your story and your time and your experiences with us, so that we can all.
And I think it's the quietest I've ever been.
Yeah.
Just listening.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, Jenny, your life's just one big drama. This was what my auntie said to me, and it inspired me to put all my dramas in one book. So if your life is full of drama, and I believe everyone's life is full of drama, this is the book with real stories, real struggles, real tools to navigate real life.